Someone your age has no business being on the road, she scoffed. You could be an offender bender and never even realize it. Walt offered no rebuttal. He had witnessed true devastation, twisted metal and spilt blood in the mud of a distant jungle. The day began in Brookfield, Texas, under a warm, golden sunrise. Fine dust drifted up from the unpaved roadsides as pickup trucks made their way to the grain elevator, and the distinct hum of a single motorcycle engine echoed down Maple Street, a deep, consistent rhythm, entirely unhurried. Walt Bennett, at 79 years of age, sat upright on his time-worn 1974 Indian Chief. Its paint was dull, the chrome had long lost its showroom gleam, but he knew every screw by feel, and each gear responded like a trusted companion. Tucked into his saddlebag was a hydraulic connector and a piece of hose he'd just bought from Miller's Hardware. As he reached the stop sign by the old feed mill, the tranquil morning was shattered by flashes of red and blue light. The strobes reflected off the storefronts and the chrome of his bike's mirrors. Walt brought the motorcycle to a standstill, planting one boot firmly on the asphalt while keeping the other on its peg. A police cruiser sat humming behind him. Officer Megan Cole, 27, emerged, her eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, her expression stern. She kept a hand resting near her holster, less as a threat and more as a reminder of her authority. Her partner, Kyle Reed, 31, walked around from the passenger side, audibly chewing gum as his gaze scanned the old motorcycle like a predator sizing up its prey. Geez, this thing should be in an exhibit somewhere. I'm surprised it even starts. The teenager recording the scene let out a laugh. Walt remained silent. His eyes looked beyond them, past the officers, the shops, the cracked pavement, toward the vast wheat fields glowing in the morning sun. He had learned long ago that not all confrontations required a response, but his quietness was not submission, it was experience.
And just across the street, Frank Miller, a Gulf War veteran with engine grease staining his arms, was already wiping his hands on a shop towel, his brow furrowed. He knew precisely who these officers were harassing. Across the street, Frank paused in his tracks, a greasy rag clutched in his hand. He had been working on the serpentine belt of an old Chevy, with a country music station crackling from the garage's small radio. But his attention snapped to the scene when he heard Officer Cole's patronizing tone as she spoke to Walt. "Hazard to yourself and the public. Fender bender." He clenched his jaw. He recognized that attitude. It wasn't about public service. It was about asserting dominance. Frank glanced at the motorcycle. The Indian Chief. He'd watched Walt ride that bike past his garage for years, always with a straight back, never once being careless. Through storms, freezes, and scorching summer days, it made no difference. The old man rode with the focus of someone on a solemn mission. Beyond that, Frank recalled the small acts of kindness. The time Walt had fixed his mother's generator during the '94 ice storm and wouldn't take a dime. The time the church roof developed a leak, and Walt was up there for 2 days with the other volunteers, his grip on the ladder far steadier than men half his age. The quiet way he attended meetings at the Veterans Hall but never spoke of his own service. Frank knew enough to understand there was a deeper story. He moved back inside his garage, rubbing his hands with more force than needed, and picked up his phone. The number he dialed wasn't for a client or a parts supplier. It was a contact from a much older part of his life, a faded entry in an address book labeled, "For Emergencies." The phone was answered on the first ring. "This is Frank Miller," he said, his voice tense. "I've got a situation. A man has been pulled over on Maple Street right outside my garage. 2 young officers. It looks like they're about to take him for a mental health check. His name is Walter Bennett." A 3-second pause followed, filled only by the sound of breathing. Then the voice on the other end, initially calm, became sharp and authoritative. Stay on the line, Frank. Ensure they do not move him. A motorcade is en route. Do you understand me? Do not let him be moved until our arrival." The call ended. Frank returned to the doorway of his garage. Out on the street, Officer Cole was speaking louder now, her posture aggressive, her words aimed at the growing audience as much as at Walt. "Sir, for your own protection and that of the community, we are taking you in for an evaluation. You will be taken to Brookfield General for an assessment." "No," Walt stated. The single word was as solid as iron. "I'm afraid that's not a request." "It is," he replied. A few more onlookers had gathered. The teenager continued to film, angling his phone for a better shot. An elderly woman from the post office stood watching, her arms folded in disapproval. A man in a baseball cap muttered to his companion about that old fellow on the motorcycle.
Kyle shifted his weight from foot to foot, anxious to resolve the situation. "Look, sir, you can either come with us willingly or we can—" Before he consciously decided to, Frank stepped out onto the road. "Officers," he called out, "that man is staying right where he is." Cole spun around, the morning sun glinting off her sunglasses. "And who are you?" "I said," Frank advanced another step, his work boots firm on the pavement, "he isn't going anywhere until the people I called get here. You're welcome to wait with us." "This is an official police matter," Cole retorted. "You have no right to—" The teenager filming mumbled, "Okay, now it's getting interesting," and zoomed his camera in. Frank paid him no mind, his focus entirely on Cole. "Believe me, officer, if you try to move him before they get here, you will wish you hadn't." She held his gaze for a long moment, a pause just long enough for a seed of uncertainty to be planted. She cast a sideways glance at her partner. Kyle's expression was troubled, but he remained silent. Walt stood motionless, contributing nothing to the standoff. He seemed almost disconnected from the event, as if it were happening to someone else. But Frank noticed the subtle signs, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his hands remained relaxed at his sides when another man's would be balled into fists. It was the patience of a seasoned soldier, holding his ground without making a move. And from a distance, perhaps a mile or more away, a low, faint rumbling began to seep into the morning quiet. Frank's lips formed a tight line. "They're here." It started as a vibration felt through the soles of their shoes. Then the sound grew, deepening into a heavy, resonant growl that was unlike any farm equipment or civilian vehicle. The teenager briefly lowered his phone, squinting toward the east. The postal worker shielded her eyes from the sun. Even Officer Cole tilted her head, trying to identify the source of the noise. It escalated quickly. The sound was deep enough to make windows vibrate. It was heavy enough to set off a chain reaction of barking from every dog on Maple Street. And then they came into view. A column of 8 black, fortified USVs moving in a precise formation. A military transport vehicle followed, a flag whipping crisply in the breeze. On their flanks were 2 military police motorcycles, their engines roaring as if they had been waiting for this moment. They didn't slow down as they turned onto the street. They entered with speed and purpose, their tires gripping the asphalt as each vehicle braked in perfect sync, effectively blocking the road from both ends. Doors swung open, and uniformed men and women disembarked with rehearsed efficiency. Their movements were not rushed, but methodical. Every individual knew their designated position. From the front USV, a tall man with silver hair emerged, clad in a dress uniform so immaculately tailored it seemed it could cut glass. Major General Robert Hayes. His shoulders were set, his gaze sharp, like someone accustomed to commanding battlefields with his mere presence. He paid no attention to the onlookers or the local police.
He walked with a direct purpose, past the military police, past Frank, and straight to Walt. Stopping 2 feet away, Hayes executed a flawless, sharp salute. "Colonel Bennett, sir," Hayes announced, his voice projecting clearly down the street. "It is a privilege." A wave of shocked whispers went through the line of bystanders. The teenager's phone shook slightly in his hand. Cole stood frozen, her sunglasses masking her expression but not the sudden rigidity of her posture. Kyle's earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression verging on terror. Hayes turned his head slightly, not deigning to look at them directly. "Do you have the faintest idea who you just stopped?" "Sir, we had no idea." "This man," Hayes interrupted, "commanded clandestine rescue operations in Laos in 1972. He personally evacuated more than 100 non-combatants from conflict zones. He holds 3 Silver Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and he trained the very operatives who are protecting this nation today." The military police adjusted their positions, forming a subtle perimeter around Walt. It wasn't an aggressive formation, it was a protective one. The kind of line you instinctively knew not to cross. From the crowd, an elderly woman came forward. She was holding a weathered photograph, its edges softened by years of being held. She presented it with both hands, as if offering a sacred object. "This young man," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "was my brother. He made it home because of him." The faded picture showed a much younger Walt standing with other soldiers, an arm draped around a small boy in tattered clothing. A profound silence fell over the street, so complete that even the dogs ceased their barking. Walt gazed at the photograph, then at the woman. He offered her a barely perceptible nod. She gave him a tearful smile. The teenager who had been filming slowly lowered his phone. This was not the kind of content he had set out to capture. Cole stood frozen, her sunglasses masking her expression but not the sudden rigidity of her posture. Kyle's earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression verging on terror. Hayes turned his head slightly, not deigning to look at them directly. "Do you have the faintest idea who you just stopped?" "Sir, we had no idea." "This man," Hayes interrupted, "commanded clandestine rescue operations in Laos in 1972. He personally evacuated more than 100 non-combatants from conflict zones. He holds 3 Silver Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and he trained the very operatives who are protecting this nation today." The military police adjusted their positions, forming a subtle perimeter around Walt. It wasn't an aggressive formation, it was a protective one. The kind of line you instinctively knew not to cross. From the crowd, an elderly woman came forward. She was holding a weathered photograph, its edges softened by years of being held. She presented it with both hands, as if offering a sacred object. "This young man," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "was my brother. He made it home because of him." The faded picture showed a much younger Walt standing with other soldiers, an arm draped around a small boy in tattered clothing. A profound silence fell over the street, so complete that even the dogs ceased their barking. Walt gazed at the photograph, then at the woman. He offered her a barely perceptible nod. She gave him a tearful smile. The teenager who had been filming slowly lowered his phone. This was not the kind of content he had set out to capture. Frank moved back toward his garage, folding his arms across his chest, his jaw set with immense pride. The crowd had expanded, but no one dared move closer now. Phones were raised again, but the intent was different. It was no longer for spectacle, but for reverence. Walt swung his leg back over the Indian chief. The leather seat creaked softly beneath him, shaped by countless journeys. He turned the ignition, and the old engine rumbled to life with the same resilient deep growl it had produced for thousands of miles. He paused for a moment, allowing the sound to fill the quiet air. Then he rolled the bike forward, the tires making a faint crunching sound on the sun-warmed road. As he moved into the corridor, every soldier raised their hand in a crisp salute. The sunlight caught on their uniforms, reflecting off medals and insignia in a movement as precise as a finely tuned machine. Walt rode slowly. Each foot of his progress felt measured, like a ceremonial procession, the kind of deliberate pace reserved for funerals and homecomings. He kept his gaze forward, but his presence seemed to acknowledge every soldier lining his path. Once he cleared the formation, he gave the throttle a gentle twist. The chief's engine roared, the sound echoing down the street as he rode out toward the open horizon. Phones continued to record, but the mocking comments were replaced by the quiet snaps of still photos and the hushed whispers of people realizing they had just seen something they might never fully grasp. And lingering behind the fading sound of the motorcycle was the steady, silent image of the soldiers, holding their salute until Walt was completely out of sight. A week later, the marked vehicles of the Brookfield Police Department were parked in neat rows at Fort Travis. The entire force, from the newest recruits to the chief of police, was present for a mandatory workshop on veteran affairs and de-escalation tactics, a directive that had come from far above the county level. For Officer Megan Cole, the training was more than just a new protocol. The sideways glances from her colleagues, the vitriol online, and the video that was now being shared across the country had settled on her like a heavy burden. She had been trained in procedure, but she had never been taught humility. On a Saturday morning, she took a solitary drive out to the Bennett farm. The gravel of the driveway crunched as she pulled up. In the back, she saw Walt on a rolling creeper under an old tractor, his tools arranged in perfect order beside him. "Mr. Bennett?" she said. There was a clang of a tool being set down, then his voice, as even as ever. "There's coffee on in the kitchen if you came to chat." They sat together at a small table, sunlight pouring into a kitchen filled with canning jars and assorted machine parts. Cole stared into her mug for a long time before she found her voice. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were?" Walt took a sip of his coffee and placed the mug down. "Honor isn't about your title or your past. It's about how you treat others, especially when you have no idea who they are." She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze wandered to the window where the 1974 Indian Chief was parked in the yard, scratched, time-worn, and still ready to ride. She understood then that it wasn't only the motorcycle that had more miles ahead of it. Walt Bennett did as well, and so did she. When she drove away, she hadn't asked for a photo or a handshake. Some lessons are meant to be carried in silence.